I never believed in ghosts, at least not until that fateful weekend aboard the RMS Queen Mary. As a seasoned paranormal investigator, I've debunked countless hauntings and exposed many as mere illusions. But this time something was different. This time I was in over my head. The RMS Queen Mary, once a majestic ocean liner, now serves as a floating hotel in Long Beach, California. Known for its luxurious past, it now harbors dark secrets and eerie tales of the supernatural. Our team, consisting of 4 members, Sarah, Mike, Emma, and myself, decided to spend a weekend investigating the infamous hauntings. We boarded the ship late on a foggy Friday evening. The air was thick with anticipation and a sense of foreboding. As we stepped onto the deck, the ship's grandeur was still apparent, but the looming shadows cast by the setting sun gave it a menacing aura. Our first night was relatively uneventful. We set up our equipment, stationed our cameras, and walked through the empty corridors, their silence interrupted only by the occasional creak of the ship settling. The grandeur of the ship was undeniable, but it was marred by an unsettling atmosphere, as if we were being watched by unseen eyes. As the night deepened, we gathered in the ship's grand ballroom. Its once vibrant elegance was now cloaked in dust and shadows. Sarah, our lead investigator, started the session with an EVP, electronic voice phenomenon recorder, asking standard questions. Is there anyone here with us? Can you give us a sign of your presence? Minutes ticked by with no response, just static. We were about to call it a night when a loud bang echoed through the room. Startled, we spun around to find the source of the noise. A chair had been knocked over at the far end of the ballroom. Emma, our tech expert, rushed over to check for any logical explanation, but found none. Suddenly, the temperature dropped, and I could see my breath forming in the air. A chill ran down my spine. Mike, the skeptic of our group, muttered, "It's just the old pipes." But his bravado didn't mask the fear in his eyes. We decided to split up to cover more ground. Emma and I took the upper decks, while Sarah and Mike explored the lower levels. As Emma and I walked down the narrow hallways, our flashlights flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. We passed by the ship's swimming pool, known for its paranormal activity. The still water reflected the dim light, creating an illusion of movement. Emma decided to set up a motion sensor camera by the pool, hoping to capture any activity. As she fiddled with the equipment, I felt a sudden gust of cold wind, followed by the sound of splashing water. I turned to see ripples forming in the pool, though no one had disturbed it. My heart pounded in my chest as I called out, "Is anyone there?" No response, just silence and the unnerving ripple of the water. Meanwhile, Sarah and Mike made their way to the engine room, reputed to be the most haunted part of the ship. The air was thick with the smell of oil and rust, and the dim lighting cast long, menacing shadows. They navigated the labyrinthine pathways, their flashlights revealing rusted machinery and old tools. As they reached the heart of the engine room, Sarah began another EVP session. "Who haunts this place? Why are you still here?" Her voice echoed in the vast space, followed by a chilling silence. Suddenly their flashlights flickered and went out, plunging them into darkness. Mike cursed under his breath, fumbling to turn his flashlight back on. When the light finally returned, they saw it. Standing in the corner, a shadowy figure with hollow eyes staring directly at them. Sarah screamed and the figure vanished, leaving behind an icy chill. They rushed back to the grand ballroom, where Emma and I had already returned, sharing our own unnerving experiences. We huddled together, recounting the events of the night, trying to make sense of what we had encountered. Just as we were about to review the footage, a blood-curdling scream echoed through the ship, sending chills down our spines. It was a woman's scream, filled with pure terror. We bolted from the ballroom, following the sound to the upper decks where we found an empty hallway, the scream still resonating in our ears. We were not alone on the RMS Queen Mary. The spirits of those who perished aboard were with us, and they were not happy about our presence. Little did we know, this was just the beginning of our nightmare. The scream lingered in the air, a chilling reminder that we were not welcome. The ship seemed to pulse with a life of its own, every creak and groan echoing through the empty corridors, amplifying our fear. We regrouped in the grand ballroom, our nerves frayed and our minds racing. "Did anyone catch that on tape?" Emma asked, her voice trembling. She reviewed the footage, but the scream was oddly absent. The sound should have been captured, but it was as if it had never existed. The ship was playing tricks on us, manipulating our senses. We decided to head back to our rooms to gather our thoughts and plan our next move. The walk through the dimly lit hallways felt interminable, every shadow seeming to reach out, and every whispering breeze carrying ghostly echoes. As we reached our quarters, the ship's PA system crackled to life, spewing out static before a distorted voice emerged, reciting a string of numbers and unintelligible words. It sounded like an old maritime code. "What the hell was that?" Mike asked, his bravado slipping away. None of us had an answer. The ship was ancient, but the voice was undeniably recent. The next morning, we gathered in the dining hall, the early light streaming through the portholes doing little to dispel the tension. Sarah suggested we focus on the ship's most infamous haunt, the first-class swimming pool. Numerous reports of ghostly apparitions had come from this spot, and we needed concrete evidence. Armed with our cameras and EVP recorders, we made our way to the pool. The atmosphere was oppressive, as if the very walls were closing in on us. As we approached, we saw damp footprints leading from the pool's edge towards the changing rooms. Though no one had been there, Sarah set up her equipment and started another EVP session. "Who are you? Why are you still here?" Her questions echoed off the tiles, but the air remained heavy and silent. I scanned the area with our thermal camera, hoping to catch a glimpse of a cold spot or an apparition. Suddenly, the water began to ripple violently, splashing against the sides of the pool. A shape rose from the depths, a translucent figure of a woman in a 1930s swimsuit, her eyes hollow and sorrowful. She looked directly at us, mouthing words we couldn't hear. Emma, who was closest, reached out instinctively, but the figure vanished, leaving the water calm once more. "I've got it on camera," Emma whispered, her face pale. We reviewed the footage, and sure enough, the apparition was clear as day. It was our first concrete evidence, but it felt more like a curse than a breakthrough. As we continued our investigation, strange things began to happen with increasing frequency. Doors slammed shut on their own, disembodied whispers filled the air, and cold spots seemed to follow us wherever we went. Our nerves were fraying, and the line between reality and nightmare was blurring. That night, we decided to explore the second-class nursery, rumored to be haunted by the spirit of a little girl named Jackie. The tiny room was filled with old toys and children's drawings, a macabre reminder of happier times. We placed a toy ball in the center of the room, hoping for some interaction. "Jackie, if you're here, can you move the ball?" Sarah's voice was calm but firm. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, the ball began to roll across the floor, as if pushed by an invisible hand. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I watched in disbelief. The ball stopped at my feet, and I bent down to pick it up. As I did, I felt a small, cold hand clasp around mine. I yanked my hand back, heart pounding. "She's here," I whispered. "She's really here." A giggle echoed through the room, soft and eerie. It sent chills down our spines. We had captured more EVPs, and as we listened back, the voice of a little girl could be heard, singing a haunting lullaby that grew more distorted and sinister with each verse. Our investigation was taking a toll. Mike, usually the skeptic, was visibly shaken, and Emma seemed on the verge of tears. Sarah tried to keep us focused, but even she couldn't hide her fear. We were dealing with forces beyond our understanding, and they were growing stronger. As we prepared to call it a night, the ship's power suddenly cut out, plunging us into darkness. Panic set in as we fumbled for our flashlights. The hallways seemed to stretch endlessly, and the ship's eerie groans grew louder. Then without warning, we heard it again. The same blood-curdling scream from the night before. It reverberated through the corridors, growing louder and more desperate. We rushed towards the source, but all we found was an empty hallway, the scream fading into an unsettling silence. We were not alone. The spirits of the RMS Queen Mary were with us, and they were angry. This was no longer an investigation. It was a fight for our very sanity and survival. Little did we know, the worst was yet to come. By the third day, our nerves were shot. We barely slept, haunted by the relentless presence of the ship's restless spirits. Breakfast was a silent affair, each of us lost in our own thoughts, the magnitude of our situation weighing heavily on our minds. The ship felt more alive than ever, its creaks and groans like a beast stirring from its slumber. Our plan for the day was to explore the boiler room, another hot spot for paranormal activity. The descent into the ship's bowels was unnerving. The air grew heavier and colder with each step, and the walls seemed to close in around us. The oppressive atmosphere was suffocating. The boiler room was vast and labyrinthine, filled with rusted machinery and shadowy corners. The dim lighting cast eerie shadows, making it hard to distinguish between reality and imagination. Sarah led the way, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. "Keep your eyes open and stay close," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the ominous hum of the ship. As we ventured deeper, the temperature plummeted. Our breath fogged the air and an unsettling silence enveloped us. We set up our equipment, the flickering lights of our cameras the only source of comfort in the oppressive gloom. "Let's get this over with," Mike muttered, his bravado completely gone. Sarah began another EVP session. "Who haunts this place? Show yourself." For a moment, there was nothing. Then a low guttural growl echoed through the room. It was unlike anything we had heard before, inhuman and terrifying. The ground beneath us seemed to vibrate, and a rancid smell of decay filled the air. Emma screamed as something cold and clammy brushed against her leg. She stumbled backward, her flashlight swinging wildly, illuminating a dark figure lurking in the shadows. The figure moved closer, its features obscured by darkness, but its presence was unmistakable, an embodiment of pure malice. "Run!" I shouted, and we bolted for the exit. The hallways twisted and turned, the ship's layout a confusing maze. The oppressive darkness seemed to close in, and our flashlights flickered, struggling to pierce the shadows. We stumbled upon the ship's infirmary, seeking refuge. The room was eerily preserved, as if frozen in time. Rows of rusted beds lined the walls, and old medical equipment lay scattered about. The sense of unease was palpable. As we caught our breath, the lights flickered, and the temperature dropped further. The air grew thick with the stench of antiseptic and decay. Sarah picked up her EVP recorder, her hands shaking. "Is there anyone here? Can you tell us your name?" The response was immediate and chilling. "Help me!" The voice was faint but filled with anguish. Emma clutched her head, her eyes wide with fear. "I can hear them. They're crying out for help." The room seemed to close in around us, the shadows growing longer and more oppressive. I felt a hand grip my shoulder, and I spun around, but there was no one there. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as a cold whisper brushed against my ear. "Get out!" We decided to regroup and head back to the grand ballroom. The journey back was fraught with terror. Unseen hands tugged at our clothes, whispers filled the air, and ghostly figures flickered in and out of view. The ship seemed to be alive with malevolent energy, determined to drive us to the brink of madness. As we finally reached the grand ballroom, we found it transformed. The once grand space was now a nightmarish scene of gore and horror. The walls were smeared with blood, and ghostly figures danced a macabre waltz, their faces twisted in agony. The air was filled with the sound of their mournful cries. In the center of the room stood a figure, more solid than the others. It was a man, dressed in an old naval uniform, his eyes hollow and filled with rage. He pointed a skeletal finger at us, and the temperature plummeted further. "You shouldn't have come," he hissed, his voice echoing through the room. "You disturbed our rest." Suddenly the doors slammed shut, trapping us inside. The ghostly figures closed in, their eyes filled with torment. We were surrounded with no escape. As the spirits drew closer, Sarah tried to reason with them. "We're sorry, we didn't mean to disturb you. Please let us go." The ghostly captain shook his head. "It's too late, you will join us." The room seemed to pulse with malevolent energy, and the walls began to close in. Our flashlights flickered and died, plunging us into darkness. The air was filled with the sound of ghostly whispers and cries of the damned. We were trapped, surrounded by vengeful spirits, and the ship seemed to revel in our terror. There was no escape from the RMS Queen Mary's wrath. We realized with growing horror that we might never leave this cursed vessel alive. As the darkness closed in, I felt a cold hand grasp mine, pulling me deeper into the nightmare. This was only the beginning of our ordeal. The true terror of the RMS Queen Mary was yet to be revealed. The darkness was absolute. The ghostly figures closed in around us, their faces contorted in agony and rage. My heart pounded in my chest as I struggled to find a way out, but the ship seemed determined to hold us captive. We were trapped in a nightmare with no escape. Sarah's voice cut through the gloom, trembling but resolute. "We need to stick together. We can't let them separate us." Her words gave us a fragile sense of unity as we huddled together, our flashlights useless in the oppressive dark. Suddenly, a beam of light pierced the blackness. It was Emma, clutching a flare she had found in one of our equipment bags. The harsh, red light cast eerie shadows on the walls, but it also revealed something else. An old, rusted door, hidden behind a tattered curtain at the far end of the ballroom. "Look!" Mike shouted, pointing towards the door. "That might be our way out!" We made a desperate dash for the door, the ghostly figures screeching and wailing in protest. The door creaked open with a loud groan, revealing a narrow, dimly lit staircase leading down into the bowels of the ship. The air was thick with the smell of mold and decay, but it was a potential escape route. Descending the stairs, we found ourselves in the ship's bowels, a labyrinth of narrow passageways and claustrophobic corridors. The oppressive atmosphere grew heavier with each step, and the walls seemed to close in around us. Our breaths came in shallow gasps as we navigated the twisting pathways, hoping to find an exit. Suddenly the passage opened into a vast chamber, the ship's old morgue. The sight was ghastly. Rusted metal slabs covered in decades-old stains lined the walls. The air was frigid, and the stench of death was overwhelming. But what caught our attention was the center of the room. A large ornate mirror, its surface cracked and tarnished. The mirror seemed out of place, almost as if it didn't belong to this world. As we approached it, the temperature dropped further, and an icy wind swirled around us. Our reflections in the mirror were distorted, twisted into grotesque versions of ourselves. Sarah stepped forward, her hand trembling as she reached out to touch the mirror. "There's something wrong with this," she murmured. "I can feel it." As her fingers brushed the surface, the mirror rippled like water, and a force pulled her hand inside. She screamed, trying to pull away, but it was too late. One by one, we were drawn into the mirror, a sensation like icy tendrils wrapping around us and pulling us into the void. We found ourselves in a nightmarish version of the RMS Queen Mary. The ship was the same, but everything was twisted and dark. The walls bled, the floors were slick with gore, and the air was filled with the anguished cries of the damned. This is where they are, Emma whispered, her voice filled with dread. This is where the spirits are trapped. We realized the horrifying truth. The spirits of the RMS Queen Mary were not just haunting the ship. They were imprisoned in this nightmarish dimension, reliving their deaths over and over again. And now we were trapped with them. Desperate to escape, we searched for any way out. The ghostly captain appeared again, his eyes blazing with rage. You should never have come here. You cannot leave. But then something unexpected happened. Sarah, with a look of determination, held up the EVP recorder. We came here to understand you, to tell your story. Maybe that's the key. The captain hesitated, his ghostly form flickering. Our story. Sarah began to speak, recounting the ship's history, the tragedies that had befallen it, and the lives lost. As she spoke, the oppressive atmosphere seemed to lighten, and the spirits around us began to calm. The ghostly captain nodded, his rage dissipating. Thank you, but you must leave now before it's too late. A door appeared in the wall, glowing with an ethereal light. We rushed towards it, but just as we were about to step through, the ground shook violently. The mirror cracked, and the ghostly figures wailed in despair. Mike pushed us forward. Go! I'll hold them off. Mike, no! Emma cried, but it was too late. Mike slammed the door shut behind us, sacrificing himself so we could escape. We found ourselves back on the RMS Queen Mary, the real one. The oppressive atmosphere was gone, replaced by an eerie silence. We were safe. But Mike was gone, lost to the spirits of the ship. As we stood on the deck, the first rays of dawn breaking the horizon, we knew our lives were forever changed. The RMS Queen Mary had shown us the true nature of the supernatural, and the price of disturbing the dead. The ship, once a symbol of luxury and grandeur, now stood as a grim reminder of the horrors that lurked within. And as we left the ship, we couldn't shake the feeling that the spirits were watching, their eyes following us, forever trapped in their ghostly prison. As we drove away, Emma turned to us, her voice trembling. We have to tell their story. It's the least we can do. And so we did. We shared our experience with the world, hoping to bring peace to the restless souls of the RMS Queen Mary. But deep down, we knew the truth. We had only scratched the surface of the ship's dark secrets. The ghosts of the RMS Queen Mary would remain, waiting for the next unfortunate souls to wander into their eternal nightmare.